and thank you very much for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Today we're talking about the Bretonnian Knight on foot, something that was teased in the developer diary on Warhammer Community. Bit of a throwaway comment on the blog, but something I think it's worth considering in a bit more detail. And then to unpack this, I think we need to look at history. Why? Because a lot of the old Warhammer Fantasy battle races were strongly influenced by people that really existed. And as far as I can see, Bretonnia is effectively medieval France, which means the Knights of Bretonnia are representations of the men that fought at Poitiers, Crécy, Agincourt, and other similar engagements. And what marks these men apart wasn't that they fought on foot, it's as that they always wanted to fight on horseback. They were men of the charge, the lance, and the sword. They were not about standing on foot with the peasantry, slogging it out with pole arms. Now, it's perfectly acceptable to say, well, actually, let's face it, the old world is going to be set several hundred years before the end times, when the Bretonnians held this view. But do we really see it likely that the law is going to be written so substantially? I don't really think it will do. And let's face it, we have seen knights on foot before. We've seen them in 4th edition when the Reichsguard were on foot. But the Reichsguard, importantly, are not Bretonnian. They're imperial, they're Germanic. They fight differently to Bretonnia. And for Bretonnia to maintain its unique sales point, which is lots of very heavily armed men on horseback, supported by some lackluster peasants, to start shifting away from that and giving them that heavy infantry option starts to infringe on the territory, really, that other armies possess. And other armies do better. Even if we don't see the return of the Reichsguard Knight on foot, we've still got the equivalent, which is, it's the Chaos Warrior. It is effectively a knight on foot. It's a very heavily armoured warrior, armed with a sidearm, possibly a halberd and a shield, trudging up the battlefield in order to slay their enemies. That is simply not the Bretonnian way. But lo, I hear you cry. We've seen a Bretonnian on foot before. And indeed, we've seen it for Warhammer Quest. But I would here look at there being a somewhat different. Warhammer Quest isn't a battlefield environment. And let's face it, if you're going into a cave network, some old caverns, something like that, are you going to be able to drag your horse with you? Probably not. Are you going to be able to use your horse effectively, even if it will fit through the doorways? Again, highly unlikely. You're going to have to go in on foot. And if you're a Bretonnian knight on some great quest to slay a dragon or something, or a wyvern, and you're going into its nest, you're probably, again, not likely to be able to take your horse with you as much as you would want to or prefer to. So I think those sorts of examples can be set to one side. Now, from a practical perspective, having a knight on foot option for Bretonnia is not a bad idea from a tactical perspective, from giving opportunities to you as a Bretonnian general. And it's one of the things that I've always struggled with, either with models on the tabletop or as Bretonnia in the Total War Warhammer game, is that lack of an anvil, that lack of the heavy infantry that can hold up the enemy army while you get your cavalry around the flanks into a position to launch a devastating charge. The Bretonnian peasant infantry has traditionally been pretty poor quality, and certainly the 6th edition infantry, it was pretty woeful. You probably didn't really see men at arms. You might see a couple of units of archers floating around, but you really had to play into the mobility side of it, the mobile noble. And I think Knights on Foot changes all that, because you've now got an anvil unit, depending on how the rules work. You've got something that can suck up an enemy charge, hold its ground, and wait, quite literally, for the cavalry to arrive. And this is a very, very different Bretonnia. This is a very different way of playing the game. It's a very different way of fighting your battles. And to my mind, it kind of, again, it makes them too much like everybody else. Chaos can play that way. They can throw a tar pit unit at you, hold you up, and then hammer you in the sides with a unit of knights. The Empire can do the same thing. Their halberdiers were notably better than their Bretonnian counterparts and could hold their ground and actually do a fair amount of damage in combat. They can be used to allow for a counterattack with knights of the inner circle, for example, to smash through the enemy line and turn the tide. But should Bretonnia really be able to do this? Bretonnia have got their lance formation. I commented on this in my video about base sizes and Bretonnians. And they really are about getting that cavalry charge off. And therein lies, I think, the skill in using Bretonnians. It's about using that cavalry effectively. Now, what I think I would rather see than a knight on foot is reasonably effective light cavalry options. Models that can bait the enemy charge, can be used to maneuver the enemy into a position where you can get your charges off. A role perhaps more historically suited to the Knights Errant in 7th, 8th edition, but we've certainly seen in 5th edition sort of those sort of squire units which were capable of acting as harassing units, light cavalry with bows, stuff like that, could help disrupt the enemy army structure. So overall, what do I think of the concept of the Bretonnian Foot Knight? From a purely practical perspective, it's going to be a really welcome development, I think, for Bretonnian armies. It really will add a tool to their arsenal. My fear is it may well make Bretonnia too much like other armies, and being able to operate in a more generic way, losing some of their uniqueness and something that really makes them special. What do you think? Do let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. I'm Return to the Old World. Have a great day.